Good evening. I'm economist Antony Davies, and this is my colleague, political scientist James Harrigan. We co-host the Words and Numbers podcast and will be moderating this evening. Thank you for participating in the South Carolina Libertarian Party presidential debate. We have 90 minutes to cover a variety of topics. Some of our questions will be directed to specific candidates. Some will be for all candidates. In each case, the candidate will have 90 seconds to answer, with the exception of the first question, for which you'll have 60 seconds. After your response, you'll have 30 seconds to respond to each follow-up question from the moderators. After the moderator follow-up, you'll have 15 seconds to respond to each question from your opponents. In the spirit of constructive debate, we encourage the candidates to ask substantive questions of each other. It is important that the questions be brief and that they focus on what the speaker said, not on communicating the questioner's position on the topic. Given time constraints, we may limit candidates' questions. At the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will have 1 minute to give a closing statement.
My name is Chase Oliver, and the reason why I'm running is plain and simple, because I do want to win. Now, right, the victory of a presidential candidate is a very tough hill to climb, but there are a lot of other victories we can win in this party with a vibrant and energetic presidential campaign. We can have wins at ballot access in states where we can make it easier for new libertarians to be able to run for office. We can win major party status in states all over the country that open up avenues that parties don't currently have. And most importantly, we can identify winnable libertarian races all over the country, and our presidential candidate can be out there with the energy and enthusiasm needed to support these winnable races so we can actually have real libertarian victories and start winning from the ground up, because change begins at the grassroots, and our presidential campaign needs to reflect that. I have the energy, the enthusiasm, and the ability to communicate our values in a way that reaches out to people who are not yet libertarian voters, who will become libertarian voters. And that's why I want to be our nominee. It's not because I don't think we don't have great libertarians up here beside me. We do. I just think I am the best in 2024 to communicate our values forward so we can have millions of new libertarian voters and many libertarian victories all over the country. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Rectenwald, and I'm running for president as a libertarian to wreck the regime. And what do I mean by that? I mean wresting power from the central government and vesting in the people at the local level. I mean winning liberty at the local level. I mean taking away state power at the local level. I mean challenging the monopoly over money by using alternative parallel currencies at the local level and across localities. I'm talking about undoing the monopoly over media, over the Fed, over voting and everything else. So in other words, what I'm doing is wrecking the regime by bringing people into the party, bringing new voters in, bringing new people to run at the local level, and together we will wreck the regime. This is not about Michael Rectenwald riding into D.C. like a white knight and exacting these top-down reforms. This will never happen, and it will never work. What is really possible is that we take control of the local level and wreck the regime. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Joshua Smith. Why I'm running is because I want to leave a freer society for my children and my community that I live in currently. That's my why. What I hope to accomplish by running for president is several things. I'd love to see a 50-state media tour where we get to put libertarian principles at the forefront of the corporate news media and all the big podcasts. I'd like to double Harry Brown's efforts from 2000 and more than double the party. I think the membership has dwindled and it's hurting us seriously, terribly as a party. I'd love to help the down ballot candidates. As somebody who's worked with hundreds of candidates across the country, I think that I'm uniquely positioned to do that. I think it's one of the most important things for any presidential candidate up here today to be doing is to make sure that in 2024, we're using our platform to help down ballot candidates win where we can make the most difference at the local and state level. I hope that this candidacy is able to move the Overton window in the United States. We are at a point that is almost we're not able to come back from. So I hope that you guys will give me your support in May and go to joshuasmith2024.com to check out more. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I don't think there is a single syllable that you heard just now that any of us would disagree with. My name is Ter Maat. I'm running a very different type of campaign than you've seen before inside this party, and a very different type of campaign than you see from the rest of the candidates. And the reason for that is that this is the campaign that I want you to look at and realize that if you actually want to participate in the disruption of American politics, this is the type of campaign that you need to support. I have been a professional economist for 25 years. My second career in public policy and public service was as a police officer for 11 and a half years on the road from age 49 to 60 in Broward County, Florida. I have been there and I have done that. And I am uniquely positioned with my campaign and with my candidacy to clear the threshold that the American people expect, that donors expect, that the media expects, to be cleared by a candidate who's actually going to participate in the process. I look forward to answering your questions and showing you why this is the campaign that I think you'll be proud to support.
I'm running for president because I want to be free. It's that simple. I want to live in a free society at least one day before I pass from this life. And that's one of my beefs with the reform message that has become dominant in the Libertarian Party. It cannot lead to freedom. All it can do is lead to reform, much like slavery reform could not lead to freedom for slaves. To achieve freedom, we have to make the principled case for freedom. The second reason is I want to bring an end to the federal killing machine. Invasions, occupations, state-sponsored assassinations, sanctions, embargoes, the drug war, and of course America's socialist system of immigration controls and the police state along the border that kills thousands of people. Unfortunately, all of my opponents in this race support that immigration socialism. But it is only the principled case that this party has stood for 50 years in favor of open borders that can resolve this part of the killing machine of the federal government. I'm running for president because I want to be free and because I want to end the federal killing machine.
I'm Lars Mapstead, and I'm running for president to unrig the system. The system is rigged, folks. The economy is rigged. The Federal Reserve has printed $33 trillion that has been stolen from the American people. The IRS is a corrupt mechanism for stealing from the American people, especially payroll taxes, which steal from the working class. I'm running to unrig our election system. It's completely broken, especially if you're a libertarian. You understand that ballot access, gerrymandering, and winner-take-all states completely rig the system so that it's impossible for anybody to run and compete against a duopoly. I'm implementing the Voters' Bill of Rights to level the playing field and make things fair and transparent for all Americans. I'm running to unrig the criminal justice system. I'm tired of people going to jail for victimless crime. I'm tired of people going to jail for choosing to use marijuana if they like to. I'm tired of the criminal justice system treating police as different things. So I'm running to unrig the system. Lars24.com. Thank you.
Our first set of questions goes to taxation. I begin with Mr. Mapstead. Mr. Mapstead, you have said that our current federal income tax penalizes the poor and that you would replace it with a sales tax. But according to Congressional Budget Office figures, under the current federal income tax system, the poor receive back in income tax credits more than they pay in taxes. That is, they are net recipients of the federal income tax system. Under your proposed sales tax system, the poor will be net payers. Please explain how your sales tax would benefit the poor. You have 90 seconds to respond.
Thank you very much. So the sales tax that I'm proposing is actually a bill that's been before Congress for 20 years. It's the fair tax. You might have heard it under Gary Johnson. There's built-in pieces to help the poor. Essentially, under the fair tax law, anyone who makes under $40,000 a year will not be paying any kind of tax at all because there is a prebate built in that goes to cover all the tax under $40,000. And the amount of money that is spent is basically you get to keep 100% of your paycheck. It eliminates the payroll tax. So you have a lot of money in your pocket to spend on things that you really care about. And also all used goods are not taxed, so we can go to a more useful economy and recycle things, which is good for the environment, and it helps, message to the left. And so this system is actually better than what we have right now because we spend $2 trillion a year on compliance with the tax code. We spend 2 billion man hours a year with compliance to the tax code, and this gets rid of all that. We can be much more efficient. Imagine if you had an extra week in your life to be efficient or to take a vacation or to spend time with your kids and family instead of filling out stupid IRS tax forms. I've been audited multiple times. No one should live under this coercive system. The government uses and Congress uses the tax code to hand out favors to the rich and to the elites, and they create these loopholes to bro out corporations, and we need to end this by abolishing the IRS and implementing the fair tax. Thank you.
We have time for opponent responses.
I just wanted to make note, there's no such thing as a fair tax. So what do you have in mind? Why is this fair?
The reality of it is that I would be willing to take whatever we can get towards reducing taxes. If Congress came to me and I'm president and they say, I'm going to cut taxes 20%, you better believe I'm going to take that. Because the amount of tax that we're paying is too much. And if we can reduce that at all, that's great. Thank you very much.
Next question is for Mr. Ter Maat. You have said that federal revenue should only come from state governments, and even then that state governments should be subject to taxation only to support national defense. What you're proposing is a return, at least fiscally, to the Articles of Confederation. We tried that, and it failed. Given this failure, why do you think it will work this time? You have 90 seconds.
I appreciate that. The Articles of Confederation failed for a variety of reasons. Yes, that was a challenge, but I don't think that anyone in the room would argue that the system of taxation that we have today is an appropriate one. I believe that the relationship that we have between individuals and the federal government in the United States today is completely inappropriate. Not only does the government express no interest whatsoever in standing up for your civil liberties, the federal government uses you as a revenue source. Anyone here ever been audited? I have. It's not a pleasant experience. It is not a fair experience. It is one where the government holds all the cards. You need a state to stand up for your rights. No one else is going to be able to do it for you. You need the state to be the entity that's getting taxed by the federal government. The federal government spends too much money. One of the big reasons it does so is because it has access to money, taking it from people like you, because we find it impossible to stand up to the government in any real political sense. That's why we need the states to stand instead for us and give pushback to the federal government.
What I hear you saying is that the federal government will turn to the states for its revenue, but the states receive their revenue from their populations. So have you not, in effect, just set up 50 separate IRS offices?
Well, we already have 50 separate IRS offices in the United States today. States today collect revenue from individuals, but states operate pursuant to state legislatures that are much closer to their constituents, politically speaking. You don't need two different layers of government to collect the same amount of money. What you need is better control at a more decentralized level over the entity that is trying to tax you. We're not talking about creating more institutions. They already exist.
All right, this is from Mr. Hornberger. You've argued that we should abolish the income tax in the IRS. Given that 60% of the federal government's revenues come from personal and corporate income taxes, how do you propose to raise the missing $3 trillion?
You eliminate the things that government spends its money on. Of all the candidates in this race, I am the only candidate that says abolish the crown jewel of American socialism, which is Social Security, one of the most destructive government programs that's ever been enacted. Abolish Medicare and Medicaid, which destroyed the finest healthcare system in history. Dismantle the national security state and restore a limited government republic to our land. When you talk about eliminating these things that are some $4 or $5 trillion out of the federal budget, now you're talking about a minimal government that no longer needs an income tax and can rely on voluntary support instead of these indirect taxes that tax the poor like consumption taxes do.
So what we need to be talking about is not like Republicans that say, oh, we want to reduce taxes, we want smaller government. We need to be focusing on what government spends its money on and what government should be doing and not doing in order to achieve that free society. And a prerequisite of that is what distinguishes my campaign. I say eliminate American socialism, Medicare, Social Security, the entire welfare state, which these guys here cannot do because they feel that freedom doesn't work. That you just can't eliminate these programs, they say, because people will die in the streets. Who in the heck's going to vote for a philosophy when his candidate says you can't trust it to work?
Okay, I sense we're at that point where the other candidates are ready to jump in. I see everybody with hands on microphones. As a matter of housekeeping, we're going to get to Social Security very soon.
Okay.
So set that one aside and feel free to have it the rest. Go.
I'm totally for eradicating the IRS and eradicating the income tax entirely. So I don't see where you're getting this from. And we'll keep Social Security and Medicare for the last question, which I also recommended completely axing. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say I very clearly call for the abolition of a lot of these things. I do know that the Mr. Hornberger, the IRS, the president does not have the authority to abolish the IRS, but I have called for a 70% reduction in the workforce, and I have called for the abolition entirely of the income tax and several other taxes. I have called for a use tax, a user fee to fund the federal government. So I have said a lot of the same things as you, sir. Just wanted to make that clear. Do you have a plan for the IRS, knowing that you will not have the power in the executive branch to abolish it?
What's important as a presidential candidate of this party is to tell people what we stand for. Now, we all know that if a Libertarian Party presidential candidate were to be elected, he has to go through the procedure. He has to get Congress to enact a law to repeal the income tax. But that doesn't mean that we cannot stand for these correct principles so that the American people can understand what a free society is genuinely all about.
Mr. Smith, the next question is for you. You have said that your administration would seek to replace all federal taxes with user fees and to fund national defense via voluntary crowdfunding. To crowdfund just the Department of Defense would require raising from voluntary contributions 12,000 times what the largest ongoing crowdfunding project in history has raised, and to repeat that feat every year. Please explain how you intend to raise from voluntary contributions an amount that is double all charitable giving in the U.S.
First of all, I'd like to preface this by saying we're not going to be spending that much on defense anymore. I mean, if I was the president of the United States of America and America was crazy enough to put me in office and we got there, we're ending the AUMF. We're pulling our troops out of all foreign excursions. We're shutting down military bases around the world, especially the ones that literally border the entire country of Iran and Russia. The spending is going to be reduced to a very small iota of what it has been. And I think that crowdfunding is going to be much smaller than what it would take to continue the U.S. empire war machine that we see today.
Given that Congress, not the president, determines the magnitude of defense spending, and given that defense spending, when it is cut by small percentages, even if we were to cut the Department of Defense by 50%, something that is historically has never come close to, you still need a crowdfunding campaign that's 6,000 times the largest crowdfunding campaign in history. Do you think that this is seriously realistic?
I do. I believe it is. And I think there's enough patriotic Americans that if we had our troops at home, which makes us a much safer nation, by the way, instead of having a large portion of our military abroad, I think that we have enough patriotic Americans in here that care enough about defense to give, 20, 30, 40, $50 a month, especially if they're not having to pay an income tax. So I 100% believe that this is an honest proposal that can be done in America. prior to 1913 and the Tax Act, we had a military, we had a government. It operated without a federal income tax. It can be done again, but we need to find some real answers to these questions. And I think that pulling our troops out of these foreign excursions around the world is the answer. And yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Smith, as a libertarian candidate, you of all candidates would take free market principles to heart. And here we have a serious free rider problem. That is, if James is contributing voluntarily to the defense, I get defended even if I don't contribute. Are you now suspending what we understand about economic behavior to claim that your voluntary crowdfunding campaign is going to actually fund the Department of Defense?
Well, I'll tell you this much. There's no moral right whatsoever in the world that says if you're not receiving something in return, then you shouldn't have to pay for it. And that is one of the most basic libertarian principles, right? They should not be extracting our wealth for something that we don't want, we don't use. And the only way to get around that at the federal level is through a user fee. It's the only way. Otherwise, we're going above and beyond our libertarian principles. We're going into tyrannical behavior. We're extracting wealth from people that need it to feed their families. 12% of the population in the United States today is having a problem putting food on the table, and we're worried about sending $200 billion to or $50 billion to over 200 countries around the world every year. It's got to stop. And this is the most free market principle I could come up with when talking about economics as far as the defense state.
I want to reinforce what he's saying. And I would remind everyone in this room that when we were a limited government republic, the government operated without an income tax for more than 100 years. And if they could do that, then certainly they can operate off voluntary funding and user fees like Josh. So I reinforce everything he just said.
Mr. Rectenwald, you have said that if elected, you would abolish the income tax. It costs more than $6 trillion annually to run the federal government. Even if you manage to convince Congress to cut the federal budget, something that has happened only 3 times since World War II, you'd still need to raise more than $5 trillion. How do you propose to do this without an income tax? And if you propose massive cuts, where will those cuts come from?
Let's start off with the second question. By the way, I'm also a Pittsburgher. I will say this. I would start off with the second question by talking about what I would eliminate. And that is, of course, eventually the Fed, the Federal Reserve altogether. Of course, they don't really cost us money except that they inflate deflate our dollar to the point where we're living under outrageous inflation. But I would get rid of the IRS, the CIA, the FBI, and the ATF, and several other departments altogether. Then we'll see what kind of money we really need to run this government. We're really talking hypothesis here, and these are kind of policy minutia statements when this is not really what we have a chance or opportunity to do as libertarians in this current moment. We need to have policies to be able to speak on the national stage. But let's talk about what's really possible for the Libertarian Party. And that is localism. That is decentralization. That is getting away from the federal government as much as possible. And nullifying the unconstitutional laws, many of them having to do with this, and unconstitutional mandates that have been passed on to the states, and go all the way to the local level. Decentralize as far as possible. In an ideal society, we'd live in a total private property society. There'd be no state at all. The only borders we would have would be the borders around your property. The only money that you would need would be self-defense, and you'd pay private agencies for that. That's really the ideal. So what we want to do is the closer we go down to the local level, the closer we get to that private property society.
Right. I want to follow up the question just a little bit, push back just a little bit here, because I didn't hear a lot of what was going to be cut in the end. And just for an example, we have a $1.5 trillion deficit. In any realistic, rational world, that's the first thing that has to be cut. So where would you find $1.5 trillion?
Well, I would cut all social welfare programs, Social Security, welfare, Medicaid, Medicare. I would cut of course, the military-industrial complex would be utterly decimated, if not more. And we would bring all of these troops back from overseas, all of them from 850 bases plus the secret one in Israel. We would bring all these troops back, and we would have to find out just what this state needs to operate at the minimalistic level. That is not determinable from this standpoint until we see what we can get rid of. And we should get rid of as many agencies as possible. They're nothing but oppressors. They don't serve us at all. The IRS is an oppressive agency.
Rectenwald, unfortunately, your time is up, but I do have a follow-up. Even if we cut the Department of Defense, and you use the term decimate, if we were to cut the Department of Defense 100%, completely eliminate the military and everything under it, you'd only get about halfway to cutting the deficit, let alone getting us to making real cuts to the budget beyond that. Convince me that what you're suggesting is fiscally possible.
Well, you left out some of the other things that I said I would cut. Is all social welfare programs, all of them. And that's a huge part of the budget. So once that is gone and the military industrial complex and its contractors are cut to a bare minimum, and once you get rid of most of these agencies, the alphabet agencies, and once you get rid of a bulk of bureaucratic employees that are nothing but deep state oppressors, then you're left with a much smaller state. And this is what we want. We want the state to be shriveled to a naval-sized pit.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say that the national defense budget for the United States is $1.8 trillion a year. So
That's incorrect. It's approximately $750 billion.
Okay. Between the 6 subcomponents. Anyways, I would say I did have another. I just wanted to follow up that cutting 70% of the federal workforce would also go a long way to taking care of the deficit and reducing the budget as well. So.
I'm sorry, did you say cutting 70% of the
70% of the federal workforce, correct. Yes. All these agencies that we talk about abolishing that we wouldn't have the power to abolish, we do have the opportunity to lay off, mass layoffs in these federal agencies, including the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, all of these big agencies. You do have the right and the power as a president for mass layoffs. So 87,000 IRS agents hired a couple years ago to harass middle-class dads on their taxes probably don't need to be in their positions anymore.
Mr. Hornberger.
I have a question for Michael. Michael, didn't you send out a tweet just before you recently became a member of the Libertarian Party in which you called a woman a dirtbag and came to the defense of Social Security, where they said that all Republicans want to cut Social Security, and you called her a dirtbag for wanting to cut, and then you came to the defense of Republicans and said, not all Republicans want to cut Social Security.
I have no idea. You'd have to bring the receipts on that. I have no idea what you're talking about. I have not been any kind of promoter of the Republican Party. Let me say it. I don't know. I see nothing here of incriminating whatsoever. I am talking about my policies, and this is what I have to say. First of all, this account was not always in my control, and I don't know whether it was in control at this time. But let me just say, not all Republicans, just the deep state dirtbags like Joni Ernst. Okay, whatever. At some point, I may defend some things that some Republicans say, just like I actually defend some things that leftists say. I don't care what party they're in. I don't care where they stand on the political spectrum. If they're right about something, they're right. But this, I don't even know what the context is.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So the question is, if we abolish Social Security and Medicare, what are you going to do for the people that are going to be basically left out?
If I may, Mr. Mapstead,
yes.
We're going to cover Social Security in the next section.
Okay.
Mr. Oliver, you have said I will start by going line by line through the tax and regulatory codes to free the market and make it easier to start a new business. Most regulation that inhibits small businesses occurs at the state level. What specific changes do you propose at the federal level that can make a difference for entrepreneurs?
First, I do agree with you that most of these regulations do exist at the state level. And one thing a libertarian president would need to do is use the bully pulpit to try to push those at the state level. I can't control what governors and state legislatures do, but I can certainly advocate on their behalf to make it easier to start a job. The reason why I say I go line by line through the regulatory code is the regulatory code is gigantic. I can't tell you every single federal regulation that's in there that's inhibiting job growth, but I guarantee you there is an awful lot of them. But when we talk about why I want to go line by line, is because we should not be having fees or any kind of business licensure or anything at the federal level that makes it harder for somebody to start a brand new business. But these things are as inhibitors. And you're right. Again, most of this occurs at the state level. The example that I always use is when I was in restaurants, I had to pay $35 a year for a beer pouring fee. I was not tested on whether I could pour beer correctly. It was merely a licensure for the state to collect money for me to be a server. And there are examples of this in the federal code as well. In fact, licensures and things of that nature that we can reduce the cost of or eliminate altogether. But we do, and this is, like I like to say, is the most unsexy part of my entire platform, because going line by line through the IRS tax code and the regulatory codes is a very cumbersome task. And it's not one that one person can do altogether. But I can tell you right now, Americans all across the country want to make it easier to start a small business, and eliminating some of these things like licensures and fees at the federal level, which again are a small part of the total number of things that are going to be inhibiting people's ability to start a business. But if we don't provide that example at the federal level, we're not going to be able to use the bully pulpit to push this to the state level. And so I would do what limited things I could to make it easier to start a small business.
I appreciate at the end your admission that this is probably not a one-man job, but let me make it clear. If you started reading the tax code full time the day you took office, by the end of your 4th year, you wouldn't have made it all the way to the end. And this is the only job you have now. And furthermore, it would have changed so much that you'd have to start over. So when you look at a problem of this magnitude, how do you propose that we get that beast under control?
Well, you will never get it under control unless you start getting it under control. And you're right. We have serious problems with our tax code. I saw a study once where people called the IRS tax helpline with the exact same information over and over, and they got a different answer every time to what would be the best tax solution for their business. And so even the people who are preparing our taxes, the IRS agents, they don't even know the entire tax regulatory code. And that just signals to me that it is far too expensive, far too expansive, and far too complicated for even the average American to have to handle this stuff. That's why we have to massively simplify our tax code and eliminate all this stuff so we can lower the rates overall. And particularly, I'm talking about things like subsidies, giveaways, carve-outs. When we remove that and we lower the tax overall, we actually level the playing field for those small businesses, because right now, big businesses are the one who have the advantage. We need to return that to a level playing field so free market economics can do its job.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say that the federal government contracts is one of the biggest jobs program in the entire world. In 2016, Donald Trump signed an executive order banning the requirement of DEI for companies that would get government contracts. When Joe Biden took office, he signed an executive order bringing that requirement back. Would you sign an executive order to get rid of the DEI requirement?
I would like to remove the executive order state altogether. I would like to basically remove as many executive orders from existence. Frankly, I want to see what service is doing the best job for the best price. That's the only thing we should be caring about when we're bidding things out. I don't really care about much else. Are you able to provide the service that we need for the cost that is the best and most effective to the taxpayer? So yeah, I would eliminate that executive order, but I would eliminate a whole lot of executive orders, because it's time that we stop having presidents govern via executive order. We should be limiting the power of the presidency. If I'm president, the office will be weaker when I leave than when I get in, because I'll demand that Congress do their job and present me with legislation and other things.
Thanks very much. I've actually spent a great deal of professional time in this area. When I was with the White House, I spent 2 years in the Office of Management and Budget. And I can tell you that it's a little bit misleading to say that the bulk of the regulatory problem is with states. It is true that the number of regulations is very high among the states. However, the states hide behind federal legislation and federal regulation in order to avoid having to compete with each other. If you would use And Chase is exactly right that we need to stop governing by executive order. The only thing an executive order should be used for is to limit the power of the federal government. And the primary way that that can be done is to use an executive order to make federal regulation subject to state approval. And this can be done for the vast majority of regulation. The object of the game is to get the federal government out of it so that states can compete, 50 states all competing, to create the best regulatory environment to attract investment.
Maybe I misheard you, Chase, but the income tax code has been growing every year since 1913, and whittling it back a little bit is not going to stop the Congress from getting right back in there and boosting it up again. So did I hear you wrong that you just want to whittle back the tax code, or do you want to abolish the IRS?
Oh, I would abolish it if at all possible. But when we're looking at what we can do in terms of regulatory agencies and these kinds of things, but yeah, I would absolutely eliminate the income tax if I could. If you brought that in front of my desk as a presidential candidate, absolutely. I do believe that actually the fair tax is probably better than the current income tax system for a couple of reasons, right? A consumption tax, you can see the actual percentage. You can say the percentage is 25. I'm going to govern on getting it down to 23 and keep balancing the budget. But what we have with the income tax right now is we have so many hidden carve-outs, nooks and crannies for people to be able to avoid paying, that those who have the ability to get a tax attorney, an entire army of accountants, they pay a far lower rate than the average working stiff. And so that's another reason why getting rid of the complicated IRS system altogether actually is an advantage to most Americans.
And how would you, as president, hope to accomplish that?
Well, if we were to get rid of the IRS altogether and we had to replace it with something, I do believe the consumption tax is probably the best way to replace it. But ideally, in the long term, we would want to get the government so small that it could be entirely voluntarily funded. And that's not something that's going to happen today or tomorrow. The likelihood is we're going to have to chop down that tree for a long, long time before it falls. But what we can do in the meantime is work on having a consumption tax. And again, if it starts out at 25, well, let's get it to 23. If it's 23, let's get it to 20. If it's a 20, let's get it to 15. But continue to cut until the size of government is small enough to fit in the palm of our hand. And it's easier to do that when you can look at a consumption tax and just see the base rate and demand that your congressperson balance the budget and get it down to X number of percent. But you can't do that with the current broken income tax system because nobody knows what everybody else is paying because there's a complicated system there.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question. I mean, you're talking about the fair tax and a consumption tax. Let me just point something out. If there was a consumption tax and the wealthy Americans had a choice of to buy products in the United States or to send their money elsewhere to buy it overseas, they're going to send it overseas where the taxes are cheaper. So it isn't actually going to work.
Mr. Hornberger?
What you've heard right now is a classic example of why this message gets 1% among the American electorate. Look at the mush. Oh, we're going to go line by line through the income tax code. We're going to eliminate the bad stuff. Oh, wait a minute. I want to abolish the income tax. Oh, wait a minute. I want a consumption tax. It's that message that garners you the maximum constituency of 1%. That's right there is your cause of your 1%. If you want to break out to the 10 or 15% level, you have to make the consistent case against income taxation, sales taxation, consumption taxation, import tariffs, and everything welfare, warfare, state program that these taxes are funding. Then you're talking about a breakout, and you're leading America to freedom instead of this kind of stuff.
Mr. Hornberger, if I may, you've just lobbed a bomb at everybody else up there. And I'm going to lob one back at you because you've said the following. If Social Security were repealed, everyone would be fine. Many seniors don't need the money. Others will return to work, and the truly needy can rely on their families and charity. Okay. You're out of step with the American people who do not believe this at all. And if you're looking at it for a reason why the Libertarian Party might be stuck at 1%, I would submit that perhaps you should start here. How do you hope to get the American people from where they are? And this is an empirical question. I'm just not making this up. This is what they believe, to getting them to a place where they can accept what you have said. That is a monumental, political task. How do you suggest we even begin on something like eliminating Social Security?
20 years ago, I ran for U.S. Senate in Virginia against the most popular governor in the history of the state. The Democrats didn't run somebody. The LaRouches did. I call for the immediate repeal of Social Security and Medicare. I call for the open borders. This was a time when Libertarian Party candidates were getting 0.5%. I got 7% of the statewide vote, 106,000 votes with this message 20 years ago when nobody knew about libertarianism. 3 years ago, as a candidate for president, I won 7 out of 9 primaries with abolished Social Security and Medicare and open borders. Don't tell me that there's not a block of people out there that want a free society. And a free society means get rid of socialism. And that's what distinguishes me here. They want to continue socialism. We have to show faith that freedom works. If we advocate a philosophy that doesn't work, who's going to vote for us? There's your 1%. There's no doubt in my mind you could repeal socialism today and people would be fine because freedom works. Children, grandchildren, come forward and help out those that are truly needy. The churches of America are filled with people. You think they're not going to help out the truly needy? Neighborhood groups. We have to restore our faith in freedom and the American people, in God and in ourselves. And the way we do that is to dismantle this coercive apparatus and restore faith in freedom, regardless of whether it's a popular position or not. But I'm saying it's a winner position. It is the only winner position. That's what would break us out to the 10 or 15% category. The same way I could double what I did 20 years ago. I have no doubts about it.
Thanks. Maybe I can save my colleagues a moment here. I've actually got a big problem with coming up with a crazy idea and saying, don't attack me because I stand for freedom. I am running on the most transformational platform ever proposed inside the Libertarian Party. And I wouldn't say anything nearly as dumb as the American public is going to be okay with just throwing people out of Social Security, even though you have paid in for the last 45 years. Go ask your family for some donations. Maybe you can go back to work, Grandma. That's not going to work. And I got an ethical problem with it. I don't think it's libertarian to say, we've cut a deal with you. In effect, we've cut a political contract that says you pay in for 45 years and then you can withdraw from the program while you're retired. Oh, sorry, we've changed our mind. That doesn't strike me as libertarian. This strikes me as damned unethical.
Mr. Smith. I'd like to reinforce what Jacob's saying, actually, by saying that the Social Security system in America has been, is, and always will be a giant Ponzi scheme. And if you're 40 today, you're not getting it when you're 80. I promise you, it's gone. So it doesn't matter what the American public wants. They're probably not going to get their Social Security anyways. They continue to use it for pet projects that don't make any sense anyway. So thank you.
Mr. Rectenwald? Yeah, I would just like to say that, young people and anybody really should be able to opt out of Social Security immediately. And I would say this, though. Say you're going to cut Medicare tomorrow and you have some person in a hospital who's on life support. Are you going to pull the plug because you don't have Medicare? I think you have to off-ramp people off of this. The society needs an adjustment to liberty, an adjustment to the cutting social welfare. You can't just pull people off of life support and have them die. And also, I'd like to echo something Mike said. It would be a breach of contract to deny Social Security to people who have been paying in their entire lives. I was robbed, I think upwards of $1 million, and I think it's outrageous that I will have to wait to have it trickled back to me. It shouldn't have happened. It's an outrage, but I've been robbed. I don't want to be robbed again by not getting it. I mean, so you'd be robbing me twice.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask a question at the end of this, but what I want to say is there's millions of Americans who are in my age group in this country that don't even have $400 in savings. And so if we eliminated Social Security and Medicare tomorrow and said, well, you have to take care of your parents now, I wager to say that a majority of the millennials in this room would have a real tough time doing that. But what we can do is we can offer Social Security for people who are my age, people who aren't going to get those benefits anyways. I'm not going to get those benefits. So let me go ahead and opt out of my system and start saving for retirement now. But for my parents, they've lived on a fixed income. That's all they have. That's what they are living on. And I don't think we can comfortably go to the American people and advocate that in any kind of way that actually gets passed. We have to give an off-ramp to Social Security. We do have to move ourselves off of it. As you've said, as all of us are going to say, we want to eliminate the program. But the way to do that responsibly is you have people who are currently living on that fixed income, allow them to do that. And workers who are my age who will never see the benefits regardless, whether we continue to tax me for it or not. Let me opt out. Let me get out of it right now so I can start saving in a mutual fund that will give me a much better return on my investment. But do not. And while it may be philosophically pure to say just eliminate it tomorrow, realistically, that will never happen. It will never pass a Congress. It will never get signed by a president. And if you're elected, you will never get that legislation in front of your desk. But we can get legislation that allows us to remove the program from the lives of the younger American workers while securing the fixed incomes of seniors in this country. That is something we could get passed by 2 houses of Congress. That is something a president could sign one day. And we do have to work within the realm of reality. Thanks.
Mr. Ter Maat?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And I'm sorry, I meant to ask you, do you think the majority of Americans who are in my age group will be able to suddenly take care of their parents should we have no Medicare and no Social Security tomorrow?
If you opt out, those things will be gone for them anyways.
Addressed to me.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, let me first remind everybody what Mike Ter Maat said before this debate. He calls Social Security an evil system.
It is evil.
And he wants to continue it because he feels that freedom doesn't work. Imagine, there's your 1% right there.
We have to let the guy lie.
There's your 1% message right there. That we as a party stand for liberty and we oppose socialism, which Michael Rectenwald is famous for opposing socialism, but we as a party have to continue an evil program because we don't think that freedom's going to work and the children and grandchildren and church groups and neighborhood groups will come to the voluntary support of other people.
One moment, Mr. Mapstead, will come to you next. Mr. Ter Maat?
Thanks, I appreciate that. I do not appreciate someone just bald-faced lying. I don't think that we should be burning up our time trying to defend ourselves against things that are just untrue. It is true that I've called Social Security evil. It's because Social Security is evil. The idea of recruiting young people into a program for no other reason than to take care of the financial overhang because you misdesigned the system 100 years ago, that's evil. That is a pro-free market statement. It's the type of statement that I believe that our party has to make. But don't make the mistake of saying just because you don't understand how to develop an off-ramp for Social Security and that you believe that you should just pull a whistle all of a sudden and cut off the payments with no off-ramp, that you don't understand how to do it correctly, and therefore you stand for more freedom? No, I'm sorry, you stand for more silliness.
Mr. Mapstead?
Yeah, the government has stolen your money. If we end payroll taxes today, within 1 year, Social Security and Medicare would be completely broke. There is no giant pot of money that the government has stashed away from you. It is a Ponzi scheme. But we can't turn out our citizens onto the street and leave them empty and dry because we made them a promise. We promised them that we would take care of them in their old age. So what we need to do is we need to stop forcing young people to pay into a system. And the fair tax does this because it eliminates the payroll tax altogether. It gets rid of the young people having to pay into the system. And what we need to do is just suck it up and finish off paying the people that we owe money to, that we promised the money to, and then be done with this corrupt, coercive regime that is just horrible Ponzi scheme that has been foisted on the people to steal your money. We need to end it. We need to get government out of it, but we need to take care of our citizens that we've made promises to.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I just want to say that giving young people the option to opt out of this terrible, tyrannical Ponzi scheme is going to make it so there's not enough money in the coffers for the people currently on Social Security. So I appreciate and I applaud the effort here in this argument, but there's no way at all that they're going to have money for Social Security if you opt out paying today.
Actually, what you did.
One moment, Mr. Rectenwald, you were next.
I just wanted to note that Jake put on the record that I've been a very arch opponent of socialism, having written 5 books against it. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to his comment. Yes. So the thing is we have to end this tax system, right? But we can do that by growing GDP. We can lift up the revenue that we're making and still be able to pay off these people without raising taxes. In fact, we can start whittling away at lowering taxes by cutting the state, by cutting back at all the bureaucracy that we have, and by whittling away at all the spending that we do.
Mr. Oliver.
Yeah, and when you say eliminate the contribution, what you're talking about is eliminate the employee contribution. You could still leave the employer contribution to help make up for those who are already currently retired, living on a fixed income, to keep the system solvent long enough to get retirees or people who are right near retirement right now to be able to do this. And you can do that by also allowing me, a younger worker, to opt out, so I can take my employer contribution and our employee contribution and actually start putting it into a mutual fund. So you leave that portion behind until those who are retired are done. You eliminate the system altogether and it's gone. But what we want to do right now is allow younger workers like you and me, Josh, to stop putting the employee contribution in when we get paid, right? Because we're never going to see those results anyways. We have two options. We can have a world where younger workers like myself pay into the Social Security system and don't get any benefits when we're older, or you can give us a system where we can opt out right now, leave the employer contribution for our parents and grandparents to keep them going, and then guess what? We can put our money, put it into a mutual fund, save it, and have a much better retirement, and still not get any Social Security benefits. Gentlemen, that's the truth of it. So those are the two options we have.
So we're the business regulation guy that also wants to keep a tax going on the businesses for
what I want to do is I want to keep the system solvent long enough for people who are at or near retirement to be able to do so, and then completely eliminate the system altogether and never, ever, ever bring it back. But what we do is we have to close up shop in a responsible way. This is part of the proof of concept that American voters are looking for libertarians. We're not talking pie in the sky. We have to talk about what really we can do and what real things we could get past two houses of Congress that are going to have a whole lot of Democrats and Republicans in them. And so we have to be able to talk about governing respectfully, responsibly, principally, but do it in a way that can actually happen, because otherwise we are just LARPing. And we do not need to be politically LARPing. We need to be politically involved, and we need to actually be talking about the real policy.
Mr. Hornberger, you're responsible for this mess. Would you like to respond?
I would. Notice the contradictions and the inconsistencies. They say it's a contract. Never was a contract. It's a welfare state program, just like food stamps and everything else. And they want to breach the contract, though, and they want to give Social Security only to people near retirement. If it's a contract, then why can't they fund everybody from 40 years on up that's paid into the system, supposedly? Finally, keep in mind this is the same argument that they used to make about slavery. We can't remove slavery immediately because the slaves aren't ready for freedom. But when the slaves were freed immediately with the South surrender, the slaves did fine under freedom, even though they had not been educated, trained, taught businesses or anything else. And that's the message. We need freedom in this country, not this gradual socialism that they all want to support as part of their presidential campaign.
Excuse me, no, not all of us.
If I may bring a more practical view to this question, the larger question of what to do with Social Security is not something I believe that any single president is going to be able to address. That's a long-term question that will require much in the way of arguing and convincing voters. The more pressing problem to one of you, if you were elected, is what to do immediately. And open to you are only a handful of solutions. For example, raising the payroll tax. Social Security Trust Fund has estimated that we would have to increase payroll taxes by about 20 to 25% to extend the life of Social Security. Or cut benefits to retirees. The Social Security Trust Fund has estimated we'd have to cut benefits by about 25 to 30% to keep Social Security solvent. Or borrow more money, further adding to the debt. Or put pressure on the Federal Reserve to partially monetize this extra spending. These are the things that, practically speaking, you would be faced with if you were elected. Which of these or what combination do you find least unpalatable?
Yeah, I'd like to go. So there's another option, which you didn't mention. And the other option is we massively grow GDP. If we massively grow GDP, then the money coming out is going to be a lot larger without having to raise any taxes. And we can cover the difference that we have in the Social Security. But to be fair, there's hard times coming ahead, because if you look at the projections for Social Security and Medicare, it really is unsustainable, even if we go hog wild on the growing the economy. So there is going to have to be cuts. Congress is going to have to hash that out. And unfortunately, they're going to wait till the very end, just like Detroit waited till the very end before they declared bankruptcy and left everybody holding the bag. So I feel that, unfortunately, the end goal, the end game for all of this is somebody's going to get caught holding the bag and pay the ultimate price for the government's failure. And this is on Congress, and this is on the last president's.
Mr. Mapstead, if I may pin you down here, you say grow GDP.
Yeah.
The fact is the government doesn't have any direct control over GDP. In fact, GDP tends to grow at a relatively constant 2 to 3% per year. To solve our problem by growing GDP when the federal government takes in about 18% of the economy and tax revenue in any given year would indicate something on the order of, a 10% growth in GDP?
No, I'm thinking more like 6% growth would.
How can the federal government have any sort of control over the economy like that? And if they do, why haven't they exercised it before now?
Well, I think a big part of growing GDP is abolishing the IRS and eliminating the tax code so that we have more productivity, so we can focus more of our energy and time on doing the productive things instead of filling out stupid forms that we have to fill out. There's a lot of ways to grow GDP. One of the proposals that I'm looking at is an energy race, is lowering the cost of energy in America dramatically so that it drives the economy, it drives new businesses into America, and it lowers the cost of inflation and drives the engine of growth forward, because everybody would want to come to the place that has the cheapest energy on the planet. And we can drive a lot of business to America and grow our GDP that way.
Mr. Rectenwald.
Yes, I mean, the reason why you can do something with the state by cutting it is that the state is a parasite on capital. So once you get rid of the state's parasitism, then you have more capital, and this will grow the economy, and that's where the increased GDP comes from, and I think that's correct. I just wanted to make a point about this idea of, abolition of things, and whether there's something wrong with being sort of a gradualist as opposed to a catastrophist, is how they used to put it. I would say that as Murray Rothbard, and I know people don't want me to talk about books, but Murray Rothbard made very clear that it's not a test of your purity, whether you believe in some gradual or abolition all at once, some immediate one fell stroke. The point is that you have that goal, and whether it's asymptotic, that is, you'll never reach it, that's still the goal. And so that's the key. And I think it is important to say that you can't just withdraw people from Medicaid and Medicare and have them die. I mean, what are you going to do? So, I mean, there has to be off-ramps. And that doesn't mean you're not some purist, because that's been pointed out before. The point is that you have the goal and you move towards it.
Mr. Oliver.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer your question that you asked. You gave me 3 examples. You said we can either raise the retirement age, cut benefits, or raise taxes. Now, here's the thing. We're not going to raise the retirement age because that just extends the life of the system. We don't want to extend the life of Social Security. We want to eliminate it over time. And so what you have to look at is you have to look at whether you're going to be cutting benefits over time. What you do is you mean test those. Those who are really well off, don't need the benefits, that extends the life a little bit. But then what you have to do is you have to look at whether you're going to raise taxes, you're going to add a little bit of the deficit. I think we can cut the deficit in other areas that allows the system to sunset, be done with, and over with. But what you can do is you can cut deficit spending elsewhere to make up for that loss for the time being. A lot of that comes from cutting major Pentagon spending and other areas where we do not need to be spending money. So if we're going to have a little bit of deficit spending, I would rather it be used to sunset Social Security now and forever, let it be done, than to continue using deficit spending to fund wars overseas. And that's where we have to be thinking responsibly. And again, realistically, what you would do is you would do a combinations of means testing so that those who are well off are no longer receiving the same benefit package. And then you would also have to add that with whether you're going to add a little bit to the deficit. I would prefer not to tax more revenue. I think it would be better to cut other areas so that way the deficit spending from Social Security is made up. And I think that's something we can do. And again, it is much better, and I think a much more moral version of being able to spend money to sunset this system altogether than to fight wars overseas, which is what we're deficit spending to do right now.
Mr. Smith?
Was this a question for everybody? Is that
yes.
what we're doing here? So none of those ideas are good. I mean, that's the truth. And you bring up the Federal Reserve, and the only thing I want the Federal Reserve to do is be relegated to the dustbin of history. It's been an absolute bane on society. The central banking system in America it's a giant counterfeiting machine that steals our wealth through inflation, and it props up the worst things in the world, including the warfare state. What we need to do is fix the money. When you fix the money, you fix the problems, right? And we've got to get away from the central banking system entirely in America. We got to get away from the Federal Reserve. The one way to do that is to promote alternative currencies like Bitcoin, The president does have the opportunity to set the boards of the SEC, the Commodities Future Trading Commission, all these things that are currently trying to fight Bitcoin because they know that it's becoming an alternative to their tyrannical system. So those are the real issues I believe that we should be talking about.
Mr. Smith, I'm afraid you've taken my proposed magic solution and simply given it a different face. Again, what you're proposing is not something that any sitting president could accomplish quickly, and perhaps not even over the course of 8 years. The tools you have in front of you are cutting some benefits or raising some taxes. What would you do?
I'm not doing either of those things.
Then you're not then you're not solving the problem. Moreover, you're not addressing the problem, which shows a certain lack of seriousness in the eyes of the American people.
I disagree.
Well, you can disagree all you want, but the libertarians routinely get 1% of the vote.
Sure.
And sooner or later, you have to look in the mirror and say, how can I communicate better to the people I'm trying to get to vote for me?
The vast majority of those libertarian candidates that have gotten 1% of the vote are proposing the same kinds of things that you're talking about here.
I don't hear anybody proposing much of anything.
No, I'm talking about the ones that have run in the presidential election in the generals. They've talked about sunsetting Social Security.
Basic question, because I thought I was, and I'm not getting an answer. How is it that you will appeal to the average American voter? And if you're talking about achieving 15%, which I think is in the real world doable and a very good goal to have for all kinds of reasons, if you're talking about 15 or 20%, I'm not hearing anything from anybody that 15 or 20% of the American people are going to say, I want to hear a lot more from that guy.
Sure.
So how are you going to hook them? What are you going to say to them to get them to listen more? Because again, politics is bringing people from where they are to maybe where they need to be.
Well, I'm going to continue to talk about this fiat system and how it is hurting their monetary gains and their wealth. It's very important to talk to everybody about these things, but more importantly, we need to impress upon the American public that we are not far off from becoming Venezuela. We need a Javier Milei that's going to go out there and talk about abolishing these systems, this socialist system that is hurting everybody, including the middle class, which is disappearing at an astronomical rate in the United States. And Social Security is the least of their worries here in the next 10 to 15 years. If we continue the warfare state, if we continue the inflation, if we continue to print this money, that's going to be the least of their worries, because it's not going to be there for people my age. And so I'm not going to pick any of your fixes here, because I think they're wrong. I don't think they actually fix the system. I think it will just continue down the same road that's been down.
What's interesting me is that when we press you plural, for practical solutions, the one man who's remained silent is the one man who's actually worked in and around the federal government. Sure. Mr. Ter Maat, could you please weigh in on the topic?
I appreciate that. I apologize for being silent. It wasn't my turn yet. So I do like interrupting these guys. They have big hearts, and I agree with all of their sentiments. Look, the big issue before the American people is that the federal government is going to go bankrupt. My biggest fear, of course, is not merely that the government is going to go bankrupt and on the path that it's on. We only have a couple of decades, certainly well before the end of the century. There's no way anyone would project the U.S. federal government to stay intact. My greatest fear is that when that happens, none of us are going to care, because we will be so sick of the federal government intruding in our lives. Now, I truly believe that if we don't fix entitlements, the federal government is going to get more desperate for revenue, not less desperate. And for this reason, we need to come up with bold, inspirational, transformational solutions. But they got to work, right? They got to work. It is true that we need to means test all of our entitlement programs. It is true that we need to sunset the idea of bringing in new people into the bottom of them, right? You can't keep punishing youngsters and using them. This is two questions. Everyone else got a chance to answer two questions, to be fair.
Please go ahead.
And for this reason, we need to reform entitlement. Part of the solution is the means testing. Part of the solution is to stop bringing young people in. part of the solution is, yes, we want to cut the Department of Defense and use that money to retire the overhang in Social Security. This can be done. It will take some time. But this is the path that we need to be on, and it can be solved. America is ready for big, bold solutions that work. It's ready for a huge reduction in Department of Defense spending. It's ready for a new style of monetary policy. Yes, get rid of the Federal Reserve System and replace it with a rules-based system that Dr. Paul has talked about and lots of other economists have talked about. It is ready. The federal government is ready to hear it because the American people are ready to say it. We want entitlement reform and we want a reduction in spending, and a big one.
Mr. Mapstead.
Yeah. So I think the answer to the question is the American people know that Social Security and Medicare are on fragile ground and that most of them aren't going to get it. And so what they want to hear is that there's a president that is going to hold Congress accountable and hold their feet to the fire till they take care of this problem so that it's not a problem down the road. They keep kicking the can down the road over and over again. And the best that we can do is hold their feet to the fire and have a national conversation about this, because it's a very important question that affects millions and millions of Americans. And so I would hold their feet to the fire and make them have this conversation now instead of letting it be kicked to can down the road for years and years to come.
Mr. Rectenwald?
Yes, I would say that the federal government is bankrupt. It just hasn't been declared bankrupt yet. I mean, this is beyond belief. If any one of us personally were in this kind of financial, snowball of complete and overwhelming debt, we would have jumped off a bridge. Okay, so we're way past that. And we're also past the point at which we can do this from a top-down approach. There's not going to be a top-down approach that'll work. It has to be dismantlement from the ground up, erosion of the power of the monopoly over money by the Fed. And that means local parallel currencies, creating parallel economies. We're in that much trouble that this system will implode. And we must have in place parallel economies and parallel currencies and parallel structures to withstand the blowback that we're going to get from the collapse.
I just have one more comment on Social Security. I think any presidential candidate that's willing to sell out the future generations for people that were able to buy a home for $50,000 probably shouldn't be up here today. So thank you.
Well said.
Gentlemen, and this is phrased to most, if not all of you. As an economist and a political scientist, we often poke at those who promote socialism, saying that you're simply waving the magic wand of government, that you propose government will do X and X will magically happen. But tonight I've heard a lot of what sounds to me like waving the magic wand of no government, that if the government just stopped doing this, all these wonderful things would happen. And I want to point out a couple, in both an economic and a political problem, with something a number of you have talked about. You've talked about replacing the income tax with a consumption tax. Nowhere have I heard the details. What are the numbers that we're talking about? How much revenue would such a tax bring in versus what we have now? On the economic side, all I'm hearing is magic wand. But then we've got another magic wand on the political side. I'm hearing, as president, I would replace the income tax with the consumption tax. Gentlemen, both of those things, getting rid of one and instituting the other, require constitutional amendments. That's completely outside the purview of the president. How do you propose to deal with this, Mr. Oliver?
Yeah, so I actually used to live in John Linder's district, the guy who actually wrote the fair tax bill. And so it is actually a full-fledged program that it does exist. And there was over, I think at the maximum time, there was 200 Congress people that actually endorsed it. And there are still hundreds of Congress people currently in the House that do endorse this idea. So it's not an idea that's come out of nowhere. And I do want to say, where does the money come from? Like, what's the actual numbers? The legislation would basically peg the rate of that consumption tax rate to match the current revenues of the income tax brings in the previous fiscal year. And so there would have to be a determination as to what that exact percentage number is. But the purpose of the act is to be revenue neutral, so that it's replacing and then currently the same number of revenue coming in. And again, once you have that hard and fast number, whether it's 30, 25, 20%, whatever that number is, you can then work on lowering it and continue to balance the budget under that number. It's a lot easier to explain to the American people, hey, let's get down from 20% to 15% than, hey, some people pay 20, some people pay 30, some people pay, let's just just kind of lower things. It's very hard to see that number. And so this is why I believe a consumption tax is easier for the American people to understand. And once implemented, it is easier to start cutting spending because they can actually see the real percentage number going down over time.
But I have to push on you.
Yes.
You said once it's implemented. Again,
yeah, you would have to
require constitutional amendments.
Well, it would require a constitutional amendment to fully remove the ability for government to impose an income tax. You could pass legislation that says the income tax rate is 0 and now replaced with a consumption tax. And then I would, of course, encourage to repeal the amendment that allows for the income tax to begin with.
But the consumption tax itself requires a constitutional amendment, unless you're proposing excise taxes all over the place.
A consumption tax is a sales tax. They exist in states all over the country.
Yes, at states, but not at the federal level. At the federal level, all the Constitution empowers the federal government to do is to impose excise taxes.
So I suppose you are correct. So to pass this federally would require that.
Mr. Mapstead.
Yeah. So the bill is called H.R. 25, and it's been before Congress for 20 years. It does require repealing the 16th Amendment. We need to get rid of that thing. It's corrupt and coercive, and it hands the power to the rich and the elites and the powerful in Washington to grant favors to the crony capitalist and that sort of thing. So we need to abolish that. But yes, the system is well thought out. There is a lot of documentation on the fair tax. You can check it out at fairtax.org. This is something that has been bandied about for 20 years. And you can look at all of the data and all of the things that they are talking about. There's a lot of information that's not easy to represent right here. But if you're really interested, fairtax.org has all the information that you need on that.
I would also just like to add that, we've passed the income tax as a constitutional amendment. We should be able to pass undoing it. Just the same way we passed prohibition, realized it was a bad idea, and got the American public behind repealing prohibition. We can repeal the 16th. And it's something that if we're going to pass any kind of consumption tax or any replacement of the income tax, we would have to hopefully have the will of the American people to do that.
Let me respond, if I may, Mr. Oliver, as a concerned taxpayer. If you came to me with that proposal, my concern would be that what we'll end up doing is passing an amendment to allow the federal government to impose a sales tax, and somehow the amendment to repeal the income tax would never happen. And now I'm stuck with two taxes.
They would have to happen concurrently. And that is the truth, is you'd have to pass one at the same time as the other. We passed, we had the Bill of Rights get passed pretty quickly, right? All 10 of those. I think we can work with two that are particularly related to one another. It's easy to sell to people, we have to pass this amendment to get rid of it and this amendment to replace it. And we can do that concurrently. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time if we're fighting for that.
And that's actually in the bill. The bill actually says that we will pass this sales tax and then we will repeal the 16th Amendment. And if the 16th Amendment is not repealed, then this H.R. 25 ceases to exist.
Mr. Ter Maat.
Is this a question for everybody or? All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think this is a huge distraction. There's actually no reason to believe this sales tax run by the federal government wouldn't just be another huge boondoggle and a complex way for the government to impose all sorts of regulations on what it is that you buy, because the government is going to be able to set different tax rates for different items. I don't think that you want to invite that into your grocery store. There's also no reason to believe that it wouldn't be even more regressive or more progressive than an income tax. You do not want to give the federal government this power. But even if you hate the income tax, which we do, if there's anyone here who loves the income tax, let us know. But I don't think so. We need a power structure to hold that off, which is why I advocate states standing in the middle. But this whole argument about the style of tax, I think, is a big distraction. What we need to get to is reducing the power of the federal government, decentralizing, right, distributing it out to the states, and reducing the government's ability to spend money. Reduce the style of monetary policy we have so the Fed doesn't continue to inflate our currency. Reduce the extent to which the government is spending our money. Entitlement reform, defense reform, these are things that we can accomplish. But if we're just completely distracted by this whole new argument that we are, as a party, are introducing, no one out there is talking about, let's have a sales tax. We're just going to introduce all of a sudden as a party the idea of having a new tax run by the federal government. Big distraction.
Mr. Rectenwald.
Yes, I agree. It's not only a distraction, it would be a travesty. Because what would it give the federal government? It would give them essentially transparency over all of our transactions. And if a CBDC, central bank digital currency, were to be initiated, then they'll have total transparency over everything we do. They'll know all of our spending. They'll be able to preclude some spending altogether if it doesn't meet the ESG or some other social justice type plan that they have in mind. So this would allow them to completely direct the economy almost entirely. We're looking at a federal control of the entire economic structure because they'll be able to control spending. They'll be able to control who you can buy from, what you can buy, whether you're allowed to buy gasoline because you surpassed your carbon emissions footprint allotment for the month, whether you can buy meat. All of this becomes possible once you hand over to the federal government the ability to tax on sales. And with the CBDC, you're looking at closing the totalitarian circle entirely.
Mr. Mapstead.
Yeah, I agree on the CBDC. We definitely do not need a central bank digital currency, but we already have all the things that you just said you didn't like about the sales tax in the income tax. And if I have to choose between the corrupt income tax and a transparent, easy to understand sales tax, I'm picking the sales tax all day long.
Before we move on, Mr. Hornberger.
If your eyes are glazing over all this reform talk of off-ramps and consumption taxes and income taxes, you get a sense of what I said today. This is the 1% message. Where is the constituency for this message here? You got $66 trillion in unfunded liabilities in Social Security and Medicare, and they want to continue it or phase it out. Who's going to pay it during the phase-out period when they all say they want to abolish the income tax? And we should keep one more thing in mind. All of their reforms involve a direct violation of the libertarian non-aggression principle, which is our core principle and the pledge that we all took in this party not to support the initiation of force. That's why they're relegated to 1%. That's the reason for the 1%. Not because people haven't heard this message. They have heard it. They've rejected it. The only message that can garner the large amount of votes is pure libertarian principles instead of all this reform nonsense.
I would only ask, you ran for president 4 years ago. A majority of the delegates in the room 4 years ago did not support your message and say that yours was the transformational message. A majority of delegates, who I would argue, the 1,000 delegates who are in Orlando, are the most hardcore 1,000 libertarians we're going to get in a room. And they still chose an alternative message because they knew they had to reach out beyond our echo chamber. And so my question is if you're saying that this is the transformational message that's going to work for everybody, why didn't it get a majority of delegates 4 years ago?
Because the predominant mindset in this party has been reform and Republican light for more than 20 years. This is what I'm trying to say, is this is a wrong message for this party. I'm not naive. I know what I'm up against. I'm swimming upstream. I'm in 6th place. I have no doubts about that. But I'm saying that if you want to succeed as a party, you've got to change directions. And let me remind you also, Chase, that the candidate that beat me fair and square ended up with the standard 1%. 1.1%. And that's all that you all are going to get if you're made the nominee of this party. The Wall Street Journal poll is already reflecting that. If you want the big breakout to the 15 or 20%, you got to change directions. That's why I'm running again, to exhort this party to do some soul searching and move in a different direction, in the direction of the founding principles of this party.
This is the last comment before we go to closing statements. Mr. Rectenwald.
Yes, I would like to say that I wouldn't lay the entire history, whatever you might say, failure of the Libertarian Party at the party's feet entirely. After all, we're dealing in a society where statist ideology is propagated from every organ of the social order, television, academia, you name it. Statism is really promoted constantly. So we need to fight a cultural battle as well as a political battle. We need to have a cultural war And that means not the culture wars they're talking about now. I'm talking about a culture war against the state. And that's not an easy prospect. It requires all kinds of education. It requires articulation of principles, but it can't be done overnight. And it's not just the Libertarian Party's fault for this. We're dealing with a mammoth of propaganda constantly coming at everybody. Everybody thinks the state's the answer. We need to get it across why it's not. And that takes effort. That takes time. It takes cultural change. That'll take the remainder of my time.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We're going to go to closing statements, and we've been very permissive with the time thus far, but I'd like to keep you to 1 minute each. Mr. Hornberger.
Well, thank you all very much for your attention. We got to do some soul searching in this party. You know, what do you want? What do you want out of life? What do you want for your families? What do you want out of this party? Why are you here? And my hunch is that you're here for the same reason I'm here. You want to be free. You want to live in a free society. And so what you got to do is ask yourself, what should be the message of this party? Who should be the presidential candidate that expresses the true, genuine principles of this party? Because if you go the same route, we know the result is going to be 1%. We know that. And it's not going to lead this nation to freedom, because reform does not lead to freedom. It means reform. If you want to live in a free society, then I say we need to change the direction of this party. Chase Oliver was absolutely right. I got beat fair and square 3 years ago. But I'm back here to tell you that we need to change away from that message that garnered 1.1% in that presidential race. And the way we do that is by restoring the brand of principled libertarianism to this party.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
60 seconds, Mr. Mapstead.
When I say the system is rigged, you know that that's true. Whether it's our economy, our criminal justice system, our healthcare system, our election system, our education system, it's all rigged against you by a government that does not have your best interests at heart. We need to change that. I'm here to help the Libertarian Party finally win something. We're going to win an electoral vote on an election map. I'm going to put the Libertarian Party on the map and give it the credibility that it deserves. Imagine on election night that we deny both Donald Trump and Joe Biden the presidency by denying them the 270 electoral votes that's needed, and it goes to the House of Representatives to decide the next president of the United States. This would be the greatest win the Libertarian Party has ever had. It doesn't need 1%. It doesn't need 5%. It needs this because it gives us credibility. That's going to drive donors to the party. That's going to drive people signing up for our party. It's going to grow the party like never before. And it's going to give credibility to all the candidates across the country in future elections so that they can say, we can win. We can finally win.
Mr. Oliver.
First, I want to say thank you to the South Carolina Libertarian Party, our moderators, my fellow candidates. But I want to run for president because I think it's time that we do have wins in this country. But we need a candidate who's going to have the energy, the enthusiasm to get across all 50 states and have the energy to really put our principles forward in a way that resonates with the average American voter. I'm traveling across this country. I've hit 40 states so far. I'm about to break the 50-state threshold, which no candidate for president in the Libertarian Party pre or post nomination has ever done. Why? Because it's important to reach out to libertarians and voters in every single state to show them that the Libertarian Party is a 50-state campaign. We're ready to reach out to voters all across America. If you want to live more free, more prosperous, and have more freedom in your life, more rights, and quit having your rights taken away and trampled on by a giant big government, we are the messenger for that. This party is the messenger, and we're going to have wins. We're going to have ballot access wins. We're going to have party status wins, and we are going to have local libertarians winning all over the country. But our job as a presidential candidate is to be the chief brain officer that puts our ideas out there in a way that is attractive, brings new people into the movement, grows the movement, and that's what I want to do. I want to make a stronger Libertarian Party this year, next year, and the years to come. Go to votechaseoliver.com and get involved, and you'll see a lot of things we did not get the chance to talk about today because we were limited to 90 minutes, and I encourage you to ask me all kinds of questions. I'll be here throughout the night. Thanks.
Mr. Rectenwald.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to South Carolina for having us and for hosting this and putting all this together. It was wonderful. I just want to say this. I'm not going to make any false promises. I'm telling you the truth. I'm not going to blow up any possibilities and raise hopes for some sort of electoral massive gain or some sort of win that we don't know that, we know very well. I want to win. Yes, I will run to win. I also want to win the lottery. So what I'm getting at here is that what can we do actually? And this is where we stand as a party. I think this is the pivot between centralized government and centralized thinking and localized thinking. Centralized thinking has got us nowhere. It's just replicating the central government's ideas. Instead, we need to get to the local level to decentralize, to abolish the regulations and laws at the state level, to take over our state and local offices, to run. And I am working to wreck the regime, but I'm not doing this alone. I'm doing it with other people that will do this with me. It is not a one-man game. This is not a one-man show. That's not how it's going to be done. So go to wrecktheregime.com. Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Oh, I'm sad we spent so much time arguing about Medicare and Social Security and income tax and not about the reason why the federal government fights so hard to keep these programs in place, the warfare state. We're on the precipice of World War III. That's serious. That's true. We're poking fingers in the chest of Iran and Russia and China today, right now. We're talking about serious damage to the world. And we're the only party that stands between the warfare state and the people of this country. We need to be talking about those things. We need to be talking about the foreign policy of the empire and how they continue to foist death and destruction upon the world around the country at our behest. And we need to be the presidential candidate that talks about stopping that. And I hope to be that presidential candidate for you. Please go to joshuasmith2024.com and check out the rest of my platform. I promise you there's more than just income tax and Social Security on there. Thank you.
Mr. Ter Maat.
Thanks very much, and thanks for putting this together, and thanks to all of my comrades at arms for participating in this. Look, there is a great deal at stake. Josh is exactly right. We need to be the party that represents a path away from continuously increasing the chances of us ending up in a world war. And you and I, all of us, know darned well the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are leading us astray in terms of our foreign policy. You also know that economics is going to rise to the top in terms of the collection of issues that people care about next spring, next summer, next fall. It's just the way of it. It happens. Not saying that people shouldn't or should care about economic issues or foreign policy. Just telling you that's what's going to happen. What you heard today was a complete lack of credibility from my coworkers in terms of understanding how these issues work. We can't afford to miss this opportunity. We have to get this right. We have to be ready to address these issues, to do so with professionalism, credibility, and experience. For this reason, I encourage you to go to goldnewdeal.org and check out the world's most transformational platform. Thanks.
On behalf of both of us, we'd like to thank the South Carolina Libertarian Party. We'd like to thank all 6 of you for charitably answering the questions that you were asked. And we would like to thank all of you for sitting through what I think is a pretty solid first cut of the debate. So thanks to everybody, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.